Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I have to admit, this is my very first 1 million copy ever. I've known about it for a long time. We're actually made an effort to get here, and I apologize for that. I've clearly missed a lot of good things. But like Stephanie mentioned, my name is Tracy John Sargent. I am the founder and executive director of the Multicultural Development Center of Iowa. We used to think we had first prize for having the longest organizational name, but apparently there are companies that have longer names than that. We typically go by MDC Iowa, so that's what you may see out and about. I have the benefit of having 2 full-time jobs, which is always a lot of fun. My wife loves that. Said with the most sarcasm possible. I'm a cybersecurity engineer. I work for an Israeli-based company, so I'm in tech. I've been in IT for 23, 24 years. And a lot of people will ask me, why would you do 2 jobs at the same time? That's borderline crazy. But for me, representation is really important. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of Black and brown people in tech. And so if I left the industry and focused on MDC Iowa full time, I felt like that was actually, taking something away from the industry. Plus, I really love what I do. It's a fun industry to be part of. Obviously, the money makes it worth getting up every morning and doing what I do. But about 5 years ago, I realized that there were not enough people or organizations working towards improving diversity in STEM. And I had one of those Jerry Maguire moments. I think I went to bed after eating some bad pizza and woke up in a full body sweat and was just panicked that if I didn't do something to address that issue, no one was going to. So I started MDC Iowa, and it initially was to address the lack of diversity in STEM. I tend to have a bias and I'm leaning towards tech, but really it's science, it's technology, it's engineering, it's mathematics. When you get into that space, we have great partners like ICAD. You start to realize that when you look through that racial equity lens, you realize there's a lot more that needs to be done. And that very quickly evolved into us doing things beyond just improving diversity in STEM. We do what I like to think is a good job in economic development, trying to make that more inclusive. And so we have a program that we launched last year to address that. So today I was hoping to talk to you a little bit about the diversity in STEM, the pipeline problem that we have, and hopefully you can all take this message back to your organizations or just make that part of your conscious thinking on a daily basis. So a little bit about me. Liz knows this about me. I am the worst at self-promoting, so it's really uncomfortable to even put this slide together. But I do think it's important for people to understand, like, what are my actual qualifications. I am not an Iowa native. I had one of those stickers on my car that would say transplant. I'm originally from Wisconsin, a small rural town in Wisconsin. I moved here about 12 years ago. I'm a son of an immigrant. My dad's from Barbados. He came here when he was 18, 19 years old. And I sometimes forget about that as part of my identity. It's not something that I really think about, on a daily basis, but it is something that's kind of worth mentioning because from a shared lived experience, it's something that I have in common with some of our other immigrant populations here in Iowa. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a tech professional. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I know I don't look like it, but the gray is coming in pretty nicely. And it's been a good journey, but it has been pretty stressful. I'm a non-traditional individual in tech. I mean, I don't have a college degree. Everything I have is self-taught. When I was much younger and first got into tech, I would live at Barnes and Noble. I would take a legal pad and pen and paper and actually just write things down in the books that I couldn't afford to buy. And that really became a fuel for me when I started MDC Iowa to make sure that I removed all the barriers that exist. And socioeconomic is obviously one of those. And so I remember some of those long days and nights where I was sitting in Barnes and Noble, my hand cramping up from taking notes and basically copying what was in some of the tech books that were pretty expensive that I couldn't afford to buy. Like I mentioned, I'm the founder of MDC Iowa, but there's a whole team, right? I've got a great assistant. We have business coaches. I have an active board. It's a whole team of people that really focus on trying to advance the mission and really serve our community as much as possible. I'm a self-proclaimed STEM ambassador. I don't know that that's an official title, but it's one that I wear with pride. Everywhere I go, every time I get an opportunity, I talk about STEM whenever I can. I'm a maker, a designer, a tinkerer. I have published designs and things on some of the 3D design platforms, but I really just like to tinker and take things apart. I was that kid as a young adolescent that would get in trouble for taking something apart just because I wanted to understand what was in it, what actually made it work. I don't think I ever put them back together, but I at least took them apart and understood how it worked. And I am a 3D printer fanatic. Anyone that knows me knows that I think officially I own more 3D printers than anyone else in the state of Iowa. At last count, I had 34 3D printers, which is obviously bordering on a problem. It's something I should talk to my therapist about. My wife's been super gracious. We actually built a 3D print room in our garage that I can actually house all of these. But I think it's just such a cool technology. You see examples over here from Pro Studios. It's just a fun technology. Additive manufacturing, I think, will change the world, has already changed the world. You've read the newspaper in the last few months, you've seen 3D printed houses. It's just a really interesting technology. But for me, it's a fun way to get kids interested in math. When I was younger, I hated math. And I was one of those kids that would ask my math teacher, when are we actually going to use this? 3D printing, 3D design specifically creates an opportunity for us to actually help kids get excited about math, see practical applications, which sometimes it's hard to do in traditional classroom setting. So that's a little bit about me. Just some, gratuitous pictures here. The Technology Association of Iowa acknowledged me as a catalyst last year and a nice little award dinner. I thought this kind of picture was kind of fun. I joked and said this is a great example of catfishing. Right? So this picture is not that old, but it's old enough that people said that's not actually the same guy. And then this year we did an MLK STEM event, which was a ton of fun. The kids how to do 3D design. We made bookmarks, and then we 3D printed them, which was actually a lot of fun. And just seeing the light go on and have them realize that I had an idea and I was able to create that, and now it exists in the world, and it didn't before, was actually pretty. It's very rewarding, and I tend to tear up whenever I think about stuff like that. But like I said, STEM is important to me, but it's also important to us as a community, as from a world job perspective. And I know the color is not ideal, so I apologize for that. This statistic is, I think, already a little out of date, but there's some speculation that by 2023, that over 60% of the future jobs are going to require some form of these skills, right? So 3D printing is right there. Robotics, artificial intelligence, AR and VR, so augmented reality, virtual reality, Internet of Things. If anyone's wearing an Apple Watch, that's Internet of Things, right? Any internet connected device, we use it, but very few of us actually understand what it is or what it does. And then blockchain. Is Mark here? No. Mark from ICAD, I think, has a passion for blockchain just like I do. We believe it has a lot of applications. We want to increase access to that technology. But important to note that these are skills that future jobs are going to require. So if we don't provide equitable access to training and learning opportunities for people to get access to these skills, that means that they're going to be excluded from participating or pursuing some of these jobs. So this should give you some context in terms of why that's actually important. Because those future jobs will require that, and we're not really teaching it in school. And if they don't have access to that through any kind of a private organization, they're left to just be curious and come up with that on their own, which is not always something that we can assume. The digital divide is still a real thing. There are not a lot of people that have multiple devices in their home. Even though I believe internet access should be a basic human right, it's not. It's still a very costly resource that not every household has. So I want to talk about the pipeline problem. And I talk to my friends at the university on a pretty regular basis, and they argue that there is no pipeline problem. They've seen an uptick in the number of Black and brown people that are pursuing STEM-related degrees. I think that that's fantastic, and I'm not here to disagree with you. I think we have a new pipeline problem. Bless you, by the way. I think the new problem still, maybe like the old problem, is lack of diversity, right? We have people that are pursuing a degree in STEM, but are not finding a job or a career in STEM. So we need to change our hiring practices. So if there's anybody in HR in the audience or dialed in, I would encourage you to take a look at what we can do to be a bit more equitable in our hiring decisions and how we actually look at intentionally bringing in candidates. There's still a pipeline and outreach program, not to call out the university, but they have had to reduce some of their funding for outreach, which has put a little bit more of a burden on private organizations like myself. And so it's up to us and other organizations like MBCI to figure out how to get access to these kids. How do we increase our outreach? There is that degree to career conversion, right? You have a lot of people that are entering some of these degrees, but maybe don't actually graduate, or when they do graduate, they are having difficulty getting a job in their chosen profession. I already mentioned the hiring practices, something that we definitely need to address. And then really, we just want to increase the number of Iowa tech jobs. One of the reasons that I gravitate towards ICAD and we have such a great partnership is because of their commitment to make this a better community, right? And part of that is their intentional effort to bring organizations in that are trying to bring with it some of these tech jobs. I do believe that Iowa has a lot of talent. And if we can create, a more inclusive and equitable community, I think it's very possible that we get people to come here intentionally, but maybe more importantly, get them to stay here, right? We have this kind of extractive culture that we live in where we develop good resources and then people need to go to Chicago or New York or some other NFL market. And my goal is to try to help them see the value and stay here. And I think we can do that as it relates to STEM, and we can increase the number of Iowa tech jobs that actually exist. So that may have been our previous problems or our current problems, and we're going to talk a little bit about what I think our problems are today and what we can actually do about it. All right, so let's start out with just some real basics. What is diversity? These are some of those words that, after the racial reckoning, murder of George Floyd, has kind of been forced into the forefront, and a lot of people talk about it, but I just want to make sure that we have shared meaning, right? Communication doesn't exist unless we have shared meaning. So my definition, actually Webster's definition of diversity, right? So it is a noun, it is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, occupations, etc. So if we use this as our shared definition, we're not just talking about racial equity, right? We're talking about gender, we're talking about any number of things that make us all different. This is a fairly diverse group here today, which really makes me pretty happy. But these are the things that should be the norm, right? We should assume that we want to operate this way, and everything we do should be to make sure that the rooms that we're in look like this, right? That there's equal representation from a gender, a racial, all of these. We want to make sure that we have full representation there. So now that we've got that covered, why is it actually important, right? So STEM is actually the foundation for all new scientific and technology insights, right? We're solving the world's problems. So obviously it's very important. It seems self-serving because I'm part of that industry, but it's still true. We have lots of problems that need to be addressed, and I believe that science and technology will at some point solve them. If you read the paper or looked at any posts within the last couple of days, you probably heard about the Cedar Rapids School District that was a victim of ransomware, right? So cybersecurity, part of technology, there's data science. I mean, it really hits all of those factors and components of STEM. It's just one local example that is going to impact our community that technology can solve some of those problems. But access to STEM education is also a social justice issue. We have a very diverse area here, but like every community, we have that magic line, right? If you look at census tract data, there's that magic line, and everything below that is what we would consider the South District, and that's disproportionately Black and brown people. And so there's low socioeconomic factors, there's the digital divide, there's a lot of things that create issues. And so it really is a social justice issue. And I think we all have a shared responsibility to address and try to close those gaps whenever possible. So some of the factors, the reasons and barriers, right? Systemic racism, we cannot have this conversation without talking about that. There's a system in place that exists to prevent certain people from getting access to things. And it's been part of our culture, part of our history since the beginning of this country. So we have to address that, right? Sexism is still very much an issue. As much as we think we're doing good at creating some gender equality, we're still very far away from that. And so that's a major factor and reason why some of these things still exist. Lack of culturally responsive mentoring. I'm part of some focus groups that talk about mentoring and the resources that we have available. And I think it's great when people want to be mentors. We certainly need more of them. But part of that challenge is the culturally responsive mentoring, right? If you are a white man or white woman that wants to mentor, I think that's great, but you need to be conscious of some of the people that you're engaging with that maybe come from different backgrounds. And so we want to make sure that we have more of that and practice of ethical responsibilities. Inequities in education, specifically in higher ed prep. My wife is an academic advisor, and she will tell me fairly regularly how she meets with students that are just not prepared to enter into higher ed. And a lot of that is because of that lack of prep that's happening in their schools. And that could be, lack of diversity within the teaching force, where there's no trust, where those students of color just did not feel comfortable engaging with some of their resources. It could just be lack of funding. I mean, you'd have an hour-long conversation just about that topic, but it's obviously an issue, but it's something that we can all address. Our mentoring platform creates an opportunity for people to connect that want to help share their knowledge and experience. If you're a college grad, you've gone through that process. A lot of people in this community that are maybe first gen, their family members have never been to college, and they could really benefit from somebody who has been through that process. And you can share your knowledge and leverage your privilege to help some of those individuals, which flows perfectly into, our first generation. Still a major factor. We have a growing immigrant population here, so there's some cultural differences, and some of those folks that have immigrated here have not gone to a U.S. education system, and so because they're first gen, that's going to be a challenge for them. They don't always understand our financial aid process and some of those factors. And so, lastly, digital divide. All of these things are factors and reasons why we continue to have some of these limitations. And then I like to have this because representation does matter. I like to talk about that because if you are a person of color, it's really important that other people see you. I talk to young people all the time, and I hear, how, it's awesome. I didn't know that someone that looked like me does that for a job. And so I believe that our young people cannot be what they cannot see. So representation is really important. That they see people that look like them doing some of these jobs. In our STEM factory, which is our STEM training center in the South District, we have a wall of STEM, which is a lot of posters of African Americans in STEM. And when they come into class, they see that all the time. It's really amazing when you see them and they go right to maybe they're a black girl that's in class that has not seen a lot of people that look like her, and then she sees Mae Jameson or other people that are on that wall, and they get a chance to see that there is someone that looks like them that does that of things. So it can be a great tool and a great resource to have. So some statistics, being a tech guy, I want to make sure that you're not just taking my word for it. So there was a study done, it's a little dated. I don't know that it's changed that much, but from in 2017, the Pew Research Center did a survey of adults that had gone through some higher ed STEM training and asked them what were some of those things that they thought were, inequitable or some challenges that they had. And I think overwhelmingly what they talked about was not feeling encouraged at an early age. So I think my organization checks that box. We're trying to get kids as early as possible. Liz and I were talking before the presentation that we had some 5-year-olds in our STEM camp. That's obviously not without their challenges. They're little rugrats and they're a little bit crazy, but the earlier that we get them and we can expose them to these concepts, it normalizes that. And so it's helpful. But we do really take to heart, this data that majority of the people surveyed said that was an issue, that they didn't feel that they were encouraged at an early age. Also, less likely to think that they can succeed. So they need to know that they have the support structure. Mentoring is very important. Financial resources, making sure that we remove some of those barriers. If you're constantly fighting that uphill battle, you are less likely to feel that you can actually succeed. And then, lack of BIPOC role models in that field, that's the representation that I was talking about earlier. So these are 3 very specific things that, individuals that were surveyed identified as, factors or issues for them as they were considering or why they didn't consider going into STEM. So you don't have to take my word for it. He doesn't like to throw some animation in their slides, so that was that. I also like to use this graphic because I think it's really important to make sure that we have an understanding of the difference between equality and equity. If you just Google that, you'll find a lot of different versions of this graphic. But when we talk about equality, that really is us focusing on everything being equal, right? So I'm 6'1", I used to be 6'2", you know, if I'm trying to see over this fence line, I don't need any help, right? I have no issue, but if we're talking to somebody who's, you know, 5'10" or 4'10", you know, they're gonna have some issues. So everything being equal doesn't actually help, because we're all at different places, we all have different needs. But what we really, I think, need to be focused on is equity, right? And so, you know, somebody who needs more help should get more help. And that's where we tend to focus. We intentionally set up shop in the South District. You know, it's historically an underserved and disadvantaged part of our community. Again, I referenced the census tract. And take a look at some of that data. The average household income in those areas is much lower than what we have. I live on the east side. It's about half of what we see on the east side. And so there is a need to make a more equitable distribution of resources. So I do like to include this so that people understand that these are, you know, this is a real thing, right? I mean, we need to address the equity or lack of equity that exists when we talk about access to resources and things like that. So, all right, here's my call to action. I usually start this presentation by saying, so what? Now what? So I told you, you know, what the problem is. Well, now what are we actually going to do? So I think you can educate yourself, you know, constantly. I think that's very important, regardless of what side of the equation you're on. If you're an individual that's underrepresented and you want to get into that, and you need to constantly educate yourself. If you're an ally or somebody that what I said today resonates with you and you understand, you have to constantly educate yourself. What can you do? How can you help? You have to take advantage of every learning opportunity that could be just in having a conversation, having coffee with someone, reading a book, looking at some online resources. I know the city of Iowa City put together a racial equity toolkit, which I think is fantastic. And one of the things that's in that toolkit is a list of books that are highly recommended to read. And so there's lots of learning opportunities. You know, find a mentor and support group that you can either be part of as a mentor or as a mentee. Right? Maybe you want to become a mentor, but you don't know how to do that. And so you might reach out to somebody that's done that already that can help you understand how to be a good mentor, and then become that for someone else. Embrace a bias towards action. Liz and Aaron have probably heard me say this about myself, and I wear it with pride. I have a bias towards action. I'm going to do things, right? And I'm going to do them today. I'm not going to sit back and talk and have a meeting just to plan another meeting. There are things that we can do right now. I'm not saying that haphazardly we just run in and we just start doing things without any thought. I understand the need to have some strategy and some planning, but embrace that bias towards action, right? Things aren't going to happen automatically, right? They're going to require an intentional focus on your part to do something. And if you sit back and just think you're going to plan and make this perfect before you execute, we're never going to make any change. So embrace that bias towards action. Use your privilege to help others. We all have privilege in one way or another, right? Whether that's our socioeconomic status, that's a privilege. It might be our race. It might be our network. There's a lot of different privileges that we all have that we can use to help other people. And then find your interests. And you may not be a STEM professional, but maybe you're interested in that. Maybe me talking about cybersecurity was of interest, you know, to you, but find out what that is. What we do for jobs doesn't define who we are, and it does define some of us, but that's not the only thing that we can be interested in. It's not the only thing that we can do. So find out what your interests are, and then find other people that actually align with that or that would benefit from that. So we've talked about that, you know, what the problems were. It's the so what, and then the now what, right? Improve access, remove barriers, build or partner with superhero teams. There's a lot of fantastic people in this room. I think we're a lot more effective when we come together. In my email signature, it says, in unity, I do believe that we need to all come together, and in unity, we can actually build a better community. So we can put together some superhero teams. ICAT has a great group, a lot of superheroes that leverage their superpowers on a daily basis. Figure out how you can become part of that superhero team. We're always looking for time, talent, and treasure. So if you want to leverage one of those things, you can always join our superhero team, but find a way to pair up with other people and join some of those groups. Because if you're out there and you try to do it on your own, it's going to feel like you're constantly running, you know, uphill, and it doesn't have to be that way. I want to make sure that y'all remember to focus on supporting local. I think there are a lot of organizations that do great work and they think of things nationally. And I think the change that we can really bring about happens when we focus locally. We know this community better than anyone else does. We have connections and ties here, and we have a vested interest in that. So it makes perfect sense to support local. And then hashtag do two things now. Think of two things, write them down, or at least throughout the day, come up with two things that you can do that you can actually act on right now. Now, oh yes, lastly, words don't equal actions. I mean, that obviously goes back to my earlier point about not having meetings just to have meetings, right? We need to actually do something. So this has been a great, opportunity. I appreciate coming and talking to you and sharing my words with you. But at the end of the day, we still have to do something, right? And so just talking about it is not the same thing as doing it. Bonus points. Does anybody know what this is? I find my fellow geeks in the room. Anyone? Paul, can you see them? Anybody know what it is? I'm a Marvel comic guy. I'm a huge comic geek. This is the multiverse. And, so I like to use this as a nice reminder that there are infinite possibilities, right? Lots of different timelines. I don't subscribe to the fact that there are parallel universes and things like that. But if this is someone's path in life, we could have any number of offshoots. And it could be later in life, right? We work with adults that have been in a career, maybe it's not as fulfilling as they wanted. And at age 36, they decide that they want to get into tech. So I would, describe them here in their lifeline as, kind of shooting off and doing something in tech that they didn't think they could do before. But I do like to use this as a reminder that, there is no one path. You looked at my, career trajectory and where I started and how I got into this. I could not recreate that if I tried. But there are a lot of different options, right? So the multiverse of STEM careers, you might be on a particular path and have an interaction with somebody, maybe you get connected with a mentor, or you go to a summer program, or you get invited to, listen to a presentation that could influence you and send you down a completely different path. And the same thing is true for the people that we aim to serve. This is the secret to my success. What I thought my career path was supposed to look like. I thought it was supposed to be like super methodical and had everything planned out. And what my career actually looked like is this squiggly line, right? That's a squiggly career, right? You can grow sideways or diagonally. You might have multiple offshoots. You could find, some side hustles that become a career that influence what you decide that you want to do and change roles or industries. And it's just filled with continuous growth. So if we embrace that, and certainly if we teach that, right, to our young folks that are going to enter the workforce, soon, I think it'll be less stressful for them. So many of them get worried that they have to have it all planned out. And so I try to share this with them that, I've been doing this for 20 plus years and it works. Right? And I don't think that I'm an anomaly. I mean, there are a lot of people like me that do not have this perfectly curated, planned out life. And so if we can get people to embrace that and at least understand that that is the case for a surprising number of individuals, that might allow them to feel a little bit more comfortable about who they are and that they don't have it all figured out. That is the end of my presentation. So thank you. Questions? I feel like I could talk at you for 30 minutes. Yeah.
So I actually grew up in the Broadway Street area.
Okay.
The local areas in this area. There's definitely a mentality in that area that if you're not part of the group, that you're not part of the group. And there's a big problem there. I think that's where a lot of the population that you're talking about locally would be coming from, not just Broadway, but the low income housing area here in town. And also there's funding for those people that would be an issue as well. I would be interested in hearing your opinions on how you handle that issue.
Handle the issue of not feeling like you're part of.
Yeah, well, so there's a mindset that they can't rise above.
Sure.
And then there's the funding that goes along with that makes it an additional issue.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we intentionally set up shop in the South District. Like I mentioned, I'm an East Sider and I'm from Iowa. I grew up in a rural town, but I have some of that shared lived experience. And so when I get access to these kids, very easy for me to help them understand what my background is. And they start to realize, okay, that may be what's being, propagated, and people are telling them that, you can't rise above, they can't see a pathway. But I think when we increase the number of people that represent someone that looks like them, that has been able to rise up. I think we can normalize some of that. And so I think it's about us getting more access to those individuals. We need to scale this. I mean, I'm one individual. There's certainly a lot of people in our community, and I think of, people like Andre Wright, great example. He's done amazing things in his career. We just need more of that. But we also need to make it easy for those people to step up and to be involved. I mean, Aaron and I were having a conversation about how difficult it can be for people to volunteer, people that look like me, to give their time, right? A lot of us, we're just tired, right? Because we're always the ones that are getting hit up to do, excluding this, to do a presentation, to come and talk to people, right? And that can be really exhausting. We need to find out how to scale that and find more people like me that can actually fill some of those roles. And so I think we just need to normalize that, right? We need to make sure that we strengthen public-private partnerships. I mean, the schools have access to these kids for an extended period of time, right? I'm lucky if I get them every other Saturday if they come to one of my classes, or maybe during the summer. So we need to get better at our partnerships where we can help fill some of those gaps. The funding is a challenge. Liz and I were talking about the ARPA funds. We have some plans. If any of you have to follow us on social media, you've seen our plans for our new facility that is going to be right across the street from NCJC on Broadway. So our plan is to invest in that community and to make sure that we're bringing the resources right to them. When we first started as a nonprofit, I like to joke that we were the couch servers of the nonprofit world because we didn't have a home, right? We went wherever we could. So we did a lot of classes out of the library. We would go to a makerspace before we opened our own, but that still required people from that particular area in our community to leave their community and go somewhere else. And we didn't think that was fair. We also recognized that that's a limitation. Right? There's a reason why people don't want to leave. They don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe. We've talked a lot, as some of our community leaders have tried to address, well, why don't we have more diversity downtown? Why don't we have more diversity here or there? And it usually comes down to people not feeling comfortable, not feeling safe, not feeling welcome. So we want to create that safe space in their community that they can go to. And I think then we'll start to see some of those results. We'll start to create some of that generational wealth, and we'll start to kind of chip away at some of those false perceptions that they can't overcome. Yeah, absolutely. Any question? Yes.
I believe you mentioned MDC having business coaches, and then another time mentioned a mentor platform. Could you say a little more about that?
Absolutely, thank you. So last year we started our BIPOC Business Accelerator, and we're very proud that it's the first accelerator program that focuses exclusively on BIPOC entrepreneurs. And very shortly after, ICAD started the Builders and Backers program, which is a great pipeline to help feed that program. But it's a 16-week program, all hands-on learning. We cover things like the business model canvas, and marketing, and the cost to acquire a customer. And it's really what I like to consider a mini MBA program to really help people that have decided to be an entrepreneur, help them maybe fill in some of those gaps. I try to use my words carefully because I don't want people to think I have a deficit mindset. I'm not saying that BIPOC business owners don't have the knowledge or the skills, and they certainly are educated, but sometimes in our eagerness to start a business, we don't go through all the process. We just get excited that we have a product or a service that we want to provide to our community, and then we just start doing it. And then you look back and think, oh, I'm really struggling to achieve, whatever my revenue goals are. And maybe that's because you didn't look at who your strategic partners might actually be, or what were the key activities that you need to do versus what was outsourced. So over 16 weeks, we cover all of those things. We try to give them access to resources. The SBDC is one of those, the state organization to get them established as a TSP, a target small business. It's really about just bringing resources to them, but also creating community, right? So we have 2 cohorts that have graduated. We have our own little work, and so they can help support each other and kind of lift each other up. But I think more important than anything else, it's that they can get other people that look like them, that are going through maybe some of the same challenges, the same businesses. We provide technical assistance. We've purchased equipment. We've designed websites. We do logo design, marketing. I mean, whatever those gaps are, the things that they think that they need in order to be successful and accelerate that growth, we try to find a way to deliver that. It's been more productive as of late because we can scale, because we have some financial resources, Green State Credit Union, ICAD, City of Iowa City and Johnson County have all supported us financially. Well, forget those bank. All of those organizations have actually financially supported that program. So we have the funds needed to actually help support those organizations. And the mentoring is a great platform. We actually worked with a developer out of London, and they created this platform for us. So we spent a lot of time looking at what works and what doesn't work in mentoring platforms. And we obviously got rid of what we didn't think was effective. We kept what was good, but then we also looked for ways to address the gaps that existed there. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people want to be a mentor, they just don't know how. So our platform actually helps teach you how to be a good mentor, right? We start by making sure that both people have set some clear objectives. What do you want to get out of this, mentor-mentee relationship? We leverage technology, surprise, surprise, to make it easy for people to communicate. But we also wanted to create a feedback loop. That was really important for mentors and mentees to have the ability to kind of rate and provide some feedback. So if you were my mentor and you're just not that effective, we just didn't connect, or you didn't show up when you said you were going to, I should be able to provide that feedback for two reasons. One, you should want to hear that feedback so that you can be a better mentor the next time that you get matched with somebody. But also I should feel like I have, some voice, and I can, speak my truth and make sure that I didn't just have this happen to me and I had no way to actually, articulate that. And so we built all this into our platform, and it's something we use across all of our programs. So our STEM learning, we want to connect young individuals with other STEM professionals or people that want to get into higher ed or entrepreneurs. It's really something that we can use across all of our platforms. Yes, Liz.
I know you have several mentees looking for mentors right now. Can you share what kind of skill sets they're looking for, what areas of expertise? So if anyone in this room has that and they're interested in volunteering, they know that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned earlier, I'm part of one of these focus groups. When we were doing the Inclusive Economic Development Survey, we identified a lot of issues or gaps that existed in mentoring. And it wasn't that, there aren't enough mentors, there are not enough mentors, but that's not really the issue. It's the expertise. And so to Liz's point, since we tend to focus mostly on inclusive economic development, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that need coaching around business accounting or legal or marketing or supply chain management. So think of any of those business topics that if you're not an expert, you haven't been in business for 20 years, that you might actually struggle with some of that. Those are some of the areas that people need some assistance. Our first version of our mentoring platform was not designed that way. So we really couldn't connect people and allow them to have a mentor at that kind of granular access. And so we just met last week to talk about the changes to our platform. So now it'll be more of a community driven where you're a mentee or you're a mentor, or maybe you're both, you're just out in the community. And then I can actually look for my own mentor and I can send a request to connect with them, but it's based on their expertise. And so some of those topics that I just mentioned are things that we want to make sure as a mentor, you fill out your profile and that they understand you have a background in, business accounting. Fine. That's somebody that I want to connect with. And we want to embrace micro mentoring. A lot of people shy away from being a mentor because they think it's a big time consumption, and it's really not, right? So our platform is designed to last for 6 months, but you meet once a month for 45 minutes. So now we're going to embrace micro mentoring, which allows you to connect with somebody one time, if that's all you want. You can certainly extend that and do that as long as you want. But ideally, you have at least one conversation. Maybe someone just kind of pushes you in the right direction. Hey, you know what? You really need to talk to a CPA, and here's someone that I would to my business uses. So if you can just connect people and they can share that knowledge and those resources, I think we've done our job. And that's what we consider micro mentoring. Yes.
You had a statistic in your presentation about all 6 new jobs next year, only having skilled for 20% of the workforce.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that, where that came from? Because that feels really soon.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah. So it was done by the Pew Research Institute. So it's not my data, but they went out and I think they surveyed a lot of different industries and talked about what are the skill sets that you think people are going to need. And so we know manufacturing has changed a lot, right? And so the use of robotics in manufacturing. So a lot of people look at that and they say, well, why would anyone need to understand and have a background in robotics? Well, if you think about how our manufacturing industry has evolved, that's a very obvious opportunity. When we think about 3D printing, right, additive manufacturing, it has changed how we produce things. BMW, as an example, now 3D prints parts for their customers on demand, right? They have a bunch of these very large, expensive metal 3D printers. So even just working in a shop is going to require you to have some of those skills. So they talked to a number of businesses across a pretty good sampling of industries to understand what are some of those future skills that are going to be needed. And so they saw some commonality and realized that this is going to be something that you need to have for the majority of the jobs that are actually going to be future jobs. I'm not talking about the jobs we have today, right? I mean, our fast food workers are, you know, some of our factory workers, that kind of menial labor, those jobs are probably not going to change that much, but the jobs of the future are going to require those types of skills. And we can't wait until those jobs show up and then learn those skills. We need to anticipate some of that and get those people the skills that they need.
You didn't say new jobs, so that's why I was curious how old that study was.
That's a good question.
Like next year, that's like 3 months, 4 months, whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, this may or may not be in a opinion-based answer, but, so of the jobs around here, do you think there are a lot of missed opportunities locally that you've seen, or maybe
Absolutely.
there needs to be more that you might be able to help businesses build that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. It is just my opinion, but I do think it's supported by my day job. I work with every major company in Iowa as a cybersecurity engineer. My job is to go in and work with them and develop their cybersecurity practices, their security protocols. So just looking at that one, you know, example, there's certainly a lot of opportunities for people to embrace more of those jobs and leverage more of those tech skills. I think, you know, we have a lot of manufacturers. I haven't talked to Procter & Gamble, but I can only imagine that there's constantly ways for them to improve and gain some efficiencies in their manufacturing process that maybe they just haven't embraced because they don't think they have the skill set here. I've had some conversations with Kirkwood about how to modify their curriculum and add some of those, even if it's adult learning. How do we create some of those learning opportunities? Because when the skill set is there and the talent pool is available, then I think employers tend to embrace that. I think, you know, Pearson, they've done a great job of trying to encourage people when they're in the, you know, training material, you know, business. Well, they have cloud architects, they do this great internship, you know, program. And so they're leveraging cloud and some of these, you know, future skills for some of those positions that exist today. Most companies are outsourcing their data, they're outsourcing their data centers. And so there's a lot of tech jobs that are going to be necessary. And we use AR and VR as a way to kind of visualize things. Architectural firms are using more of that. No longer build models, you know, out of balsa wood and things like that, right? We're using AR and VR. So a lot of positions and a lot of industries have actually shifted to more of those techniques. But again, just my opinion.
Sure.
And to make sure that we have enough
Yeah.
time for announcements, I will ask the final question. What are the community can do?
Oh, well, it's a time, talent, and treasure. It's pretty easy. We certainly need a lot of volunteers. Doesn't matter what your skill set is. Sometimes just showing up for our community is helpful. You know, if you have a particular talent, if you are, you know, a marketing individual or somebody that has a legal background or, you know, accounting, these are all things that our organization doesn't always have funds to pay for. So anyone that can deliver some of those pro bono is certainly helpful. And then we're a nonprofit, so the treasury, right? It's all about the money. And certainly there's a lot of public resources, but getting a commitment and involvement from the community to make a donation is always very helpful.